Humanity had many serial killers, and the great majority of them have one thing in common. When they stand trial, they tell us about their horrible childhood or adolescence. And while we might feel bad for the child they were, we now have to judge them on the adult they have become. But how much fault really lies with them? And shouldn't the people that turned them into monsters also stand trial? Let's talk about it. Jürgen Bartsch was born on the 6th of November, 1946 in West Germany, and his life was a struggle from the beginning. His mother, a war widow, was suffering from tuberculosis, a disease which would kill her only a few months after her son was born. A fact the young woman likely knew, for she abandoned the baby at the hospital it was born in. Although this wasn't a name he would carry for the rest of his life, she did wish him to be named Karl-Heinz Saturninski. Before the woman left the hospital, she told the nurses that the father of her child wasn't her fallen husband, but a Dutch seasonal worker, who she only named as Cucumber Philip. The year the boy was born in, 1946, was shortly after the end of the Second World War, which meant that everyone was struggling. There wasn't enough food and not even enough wood to keep the hospitals warm in winter. The orphanages were also filled to the brim, so it was arranged that baby Jürgen stayed with the nurses in the hospital his mother had left him at. But the nurses didn't have enough time to take care of a baby. They were struggling themselves, so Jürgen had to learn to take care of himself pretty much from the get-go. He learned to feed himself as soon as he was able to hold a bottle, and he even potty trained himself. As you can imagine, he was also very love-deprived. No one was there to hug or console him if he had a nightmare. While he was surrounded by people, he was factually alone. This is one of the facts that psychiatrists later said turned him into what he became. But let's not jump ahead. While Jürgen was raised in that hospital, a woman underwent a hysterectomy there. Her name was Gertrude Bartsch. She was the wife of a very wealthy butcher. The couple didn't have children, and with her operation, that chapter should have been closed. But her husband, Gerhard Bartsch, still wanted an heir for his butcher shop and his pretty substantial wealth. So through a nurse, they found out that there was an orphaned child at the hospital, and they decided to adopt him. For no reason, mind you, other than to have an heir that they could give the shop to. Neither of them had a single paternal bone in their body. The Youth Welfare Office actually protested the adoption at first. Not because they actually checked if those two people would be good parents, but, and I quote, "The adoption is currently denied because of the questionable birth of the child and the potential medical abnormalities of the biological parents," end quote. What they didn't know at that point was that it would be his adopted parents that would permanently mentally damage the young boy. Nonetheless, they were granted permission to take the boy home, and 7 years later, in 1954, they were allowed to officially adopt him. Jürgen would later describe his parents as follows. His father, Gerhard, he called the screaming sergeant, who constantly bullied the boy and hit him when he did something wrong. But Jürgen would also later say that he preferred his father, because at least he knew that his father cared for him in his own way. But nonetheless, the father would bully him from early childhood on, and this continued even when Jürgen became an apprentice in the butcher shop. His mother Gertrude was a different story. She let the boy know from the beginning that she did not want him. In fact, she told Jürgen if she had to have a child, she would have preferred a girl. Jürgen would later state the following in court. "She didn't want me. She didn't want a child. She wanted a doll, a toy, to dress up and play pretend. Someone that had no mind or emotion of their own." Gertrude would also beat the little boy, black and blue, mercilessly, at every occasion. She didn't need a reason. When he turned 6, she started locking him up in the basement without any lights. She also developed a pathological obsession with cleaning and cleanliness. It became so bad that she didn't even let Jürgen clean himself. Up until he was 18, she still bathed him. The two parents also completely isolated the boy from other children. More specific, the neighbors' children. Because they didn't want him to find out that he was adopted. Even though everyone in the neighborhood knew, so it was only a matter of time till he found out. This insane need to keep his adoption a secret led to them putting Jürgen into a children's home when he was 10. Not to give him away, but so he could go to school there and not the school close to his home. But after 2 years, they took him out of that place because they didn't think that the boy was raised harsh or strict enough there. So with 12, they brought him to a Catholic boarding school under the leadership of a man named Father Gerhard Pütz. And this is where the real hell began for the little boy. I will warn you now that the rest of the story is quite horrific and will deal with DSA, torture, and murder of children. So viewer discretion is definitely advised. Gerhard Pütz is what we would call today a sadomasochistic pedophile. The priest essayed every child that he could get his hand on, including young Jürgen. And not only did he essay them, he would show them pictures and tell them stories of the tortures that were done in the concentration camps. And he would also tell them stories of the sadistic child rapist, Gilles de Rais, from medieval France. That priest was truly a horrific man, and of course, he never got punished for any of the crimes he committed. Psychiatrists would later say that what was done to Jürgen Bartsch was nothing short of a murder of the soul. And it's here, under the relentless abuse of the priest, where Jürgen turned from an innocent boy into a monster himself. Jürgen tried to run away twice from the boarding school. The second time, he took his only friend named Dieter with him. While they were running away, they came across a train track. And for some reason, and even later when he talked to psychiatrists and lawyers, he couldn't explain it, he got the urge to push Dieter onto the train tracks, where a train was approaching. So he did it. He pushed him in front of the train. Later, he would write to a US journalist that he thought, and I quote, "If I push him in front of the train, he will be dead, and then he can't fight me off when I take his clothes off." Thankfully, Dieter managed to roll himself to safety right before the train hit him. Obviously, he was angry, but Jürgen played it off and told him he just stumbled into him by accident. But it was clear at this point that something had completely snapped in Jürgen's mind. When he was 13, Jürgen finally found out the truth. He found his adoption papers. This would rattle the boy even more because he realized that all the torture he had suffered stemmed from people that weren't even his real parents. The woman that beat him for not being a girl who sent him to that horrific boarding school had had no reason to do it. She willingly adopted him, even though she didn't want him. His psychiatrist would later say it was very likely this revelation that completely destroyed anything good that had still existed in him. About a year later, he would find something that would help him give his sadistic fantasies a real home. He found what he would later call his cave, an old shallow mine in the woods not too far away from his parents' house. Well, he didn't really find it. Other children showed it to him. It was dark, cold, and damp, and Jürgen loved it. He called it the most beautiful place on earth. And he soon began filling it with the tools that he needed to fulfill his monstrous urges. Razor blades, ropes, candles, and 2 or 3 blank guns. He would later state that as soon as he got shown the cave, he knew he wanted to kill children there. The first boy he tried to assault was a little boy from his neighborhood. He lured him into the nearby forest and tried to take his clothes off, but the boy fought back, so Jürgen beat him and then let him go. The boy ran home and told his uncle what had happened, who then went to Jürgen's parents. And even though the boy repeated over and over that Jürgen tried to take his clothes off, Jürgen denied everything. So Gertrud Bartsch gave the uncle $20, and that was that. The first time Jürgen willingly had sex with anyone was with a young man that was working in his parents' butcher shop. But after the first time they had sex, the other man, named Detlef, started blackmailing Jürgen. Jürgen had to give him money, so the other man wouldn't tell his father. Jürgen paid, and the relationship continued. After a while, Jürgen confessed to the other man that he actually fantasized about having sex with young boys between 8 and 13. And unbelievable enough, the other man offered to go look for such boys if Jürgen gave him $300. And he actually goes out to look 6 or 7 times. Jürgen even gives him specific instructions. The boy can't have red hair or freckles. And he can't weigh too much, but also not too little. Jürgen would later describe to psychiatrists that when he saw the right boy, he would start sweating, get weak in the knees, and his heart would start beating frantically. Fortunate enough, Detlef never found a boy to bring to Jürgen. With 14, Jürgen tried his luck by himself again, and this would lead him to find his hunting ground: fun fairs. It was at such a fair that he picked out 3 boys together. They were 7, 10, and 11. He lured them to a forest and forcefully took off their clothes, and punched them in the stomach a few times. And then, for some reason, he let them go again. He later would tell police that they were so scared that they didn't even fight him back, and just let it happen. And now would come Jürgen's last non-lethal attack, and with it the best chance to stop what would happen later. In June of 1961, Jürgen lured the son of the local painter into his cave. There he forced the boy to undress, beat him, and he committed sexual acts on the child. But he let him go afterwards. The little boy went home and told his parents. His father was enraged, as you can imagine. He went to confront Jürgen and his parents, but Jürgen once more denied everything. And when his parents tried to pay the man off, he immediately went to the police. And Jürgen even got charged and arrested. But unbelievable, the prosecutor put the case to the files as just children playing around. A fatal mistake. But the painter would get justice for his son. It would just take a while. The older Jürgen gets, the worse and more deprived his fantasies get too. He would later tell his psychiatrist that it got to a point where he knew if they didn't scream or beg for their life, it wouldn't turn him on. What followed would be the worst murder cases in the young BRD history. His first victim, he finds like most of the others, at a local fun fair. Klaus was only 8 years old when Jürgen starts talking to him on the 31st of March 1962. The little boy was alone at the fair in Essen, which at the time was completely normal. Jürgen told the child that he knows of a hidden treasure in a secret weapon storage from back in the war. And Klaus, who grew up without knowing the concept of stranger danger, followed Jürgen to his cave. And now once more, a trigger warning. And it will be a trigger warning to nearly the end of the video. I'll put a timestamp in. I will obviously not give graphic details, but even the non-graphic ones are horrific. The American journalist that Jürgen talked to from prison would later write in his book that even though every murder had little discrepancies, they all pretty much followed the same pattern. After he lured Klaus into the cave, he beat him up a little, so the boy wouldn't fight back. Then he tied him up with some ropes from his father's butcher shop. He then ate him and tortured the boy's private parts while masturbating on him. Then he either strangulated Klaus or beat him to death. After that, he cut the body open to empty out the organs, and then he buried him. His second victim Jürgen finds on the 6th of August in 1965. His name was Peter and he was 13. Jürgen later recounted the following. "That was the poor boy that I found when I came back from holiday. I immediately saw that he was lost. He must have been wandering for hours. He was limping. I watched as he went to a police station, but he didn't go in, so I saw my chance and approached him. He told me that he hadn't eaten since breakfast, and I will never forget his white and relieved smile when I offered my help. It should have touched me. I asked God every day why it didn't touch me, why it didn't mean anything, but nothing could get me to stop now. There was no pity left in me." What Jürgen would tell his psychiatrist would shed even more light on his inner workings. His quote, "The only thing you could compare me to was a predator, which already held his prey in his mouth. Only after it was done did I feel pity, regret, where I started crying, a wailing really, but truly a fake one, because it didn't help the children. And no amount of regret I felt afterwards could stop me from doing it again. But I remember the sorrow I felt when I read in the newspaper that Peter's dad had just bought him a football and football shoes that he had begged a year for." End quote. As I said before, his crimes didn't change. He did the same thing to Peter that he did to Klaus. Only a few days later, he found his third victim. On the 14th of August in 1965, he went to another fair. Ulrich, an 11-year-old boy, is also there. Jürgen befriends the boy, and they spend nearly an hour riding every ride at the fair. He lures Ulrich along to his car by telling him that he needed to pick something up, and if he accompanied him, he would give him some money. But sweetly, Ulrich denies the money, because Jürgen had paid for the rides at the fair. Ulrich offered to help him as payback, but Jürgen actually stopped the car on the way and pushed $50 into Ulrich's pants for some reason. When Jürgen turned the car into a field road, Ulrich knew that something bad would happen. Jürgen said, "As soon as I turned the car into the road, the little boy started panicking and shouted, 'I knew it! I knew it!' And he desperately tried to open the car door. But Jürgen had manipulated the doors, so they would only open if you pushed them in, not outwards. So there was no escaping for the boy. The little boy begged for his life, but Jürgen tied him up, still in the car, and then he took a hammer and beat the boy on the head. Jürgen recalled that in one moment the boy screamed terribly, and then he was quiet, and the entire floor of the car was covered in blood. He drove to a secluded car parking spot, and even though he thought Ulrich was dead, the little boy suddenly sat back up, so Jürgen hit him with the hammer again before dragging him off to the cave. After this murder is the first time that the police include the public. One of the people that had visited the fair actually took a photo that also showed Ulrich and Jürgen, and police published that photo. But as you can imagine, the quality at the time was horrible, and unfortunately no one recognized Jürgen. But at least the public was now warned that there was a child killer going around. But so was Jürgen. Posters were hung up all over town with a blurry image of Jürgen on them. This worried him so much that he even checked in with Detlef at this point, because he was sure that the man would recognize him on the posters. But neither Detlef nor his parents gave any hint that they thought it was him. Jürgen, meanwhile, had something psychiatrists called a moral hangover. That and his fear of being caught led to him developing a drinking habit, which in turn led him to drunk driving and losing his license, which posed a problem for him because he used his car to get his victims to his cave. But nonetheless, that didn't stop him. On May 6, 1966, he finds his next victim. He meets 11-year-old Manfred at another fair. He promises the little boy to take him treasure hunting and leads him to his cave. There he has aced him and then beats him to death. And this will be the only body where forensics could prove that he used a knife from his father's butcher shop to cut the body up. All the other bodies were too decomposed for such forensics. On the 18th of June 1966, Jürgen would meet his last victim, 14-year-old Peter. He lured the boy to the cave, where he forced him to take his clothes off by beating and kicking him. Then he tried to SA him, but Jürgen notices that it was getting late, and he knows his mother will expect him to be there for dinner. So Jürgen tells Peter that he will go and eat now, and he will come back later to kill him. He literally tells this poor petrified child that. But Peter wasn't ready to die. Jürgen left the candle burning on the table, so Peter gets up and holds his tight wrist to the flame, and to his absolute horror, the candle goes out. Peter later recounts the following: "I was petrified when the flames went out, but I remembered the matches on the table. It must have taken a few minutes to light the candle back up with my tight wrists, but it felt like hours. And finally I managed to burn through the ties. The only thing I put back on was my underpants. I was too scared he would return to even take the rest of my clothes. Then I ran to the houses that were only a bit away from the mine entrance. When Jürgen returned and saw that the boy had escaped, he weirdly didn't panic. He just went back home and to bed. He would later tell his psychiatrist that he wasn't worried. He just had this feeling of unfinished business, and he hated that." But while Jürgen went to bed, Peter was at the police station, and he told them everything, and even led them back to the mine. And then, as you can imagine, all hell breaks loose. Detectives arrive, more police officers, and a team of forensics. The first thing they find is the tip of a finger, and then, under some wooden beams, the decomposing, chopped up bodies of the children. The next day, the news is filled with nothing but a horrific find. And while all of this is going on and the police are desperately trying to find the killer, Jürgen decides that it's a good idea to look for another boy to kill. But what he doesn't know is that father, the painter from 5 years ago, has seen the news that morning. And he immediately knew that the killer must be Jürgen, so he goes to the police. Jürgen thankfully did not find another victim that day, mostly because the parents are now too scared to let their children out of sight. On June 21st, the police arrive at the butcher shop and arrest Jürgen Bartsch. While at first he denies everything, he breaks apart as soon as the police tell him that they found the bodies. What would happen now would make Jürgen the first quote-unquote media star of German crime history. People were enraged, and at the same time they wanted more and more information. Journalists would later say that you couldn't sell a paper at the time unless Jürgen Bartsch was on the front. But not only did people want information, they also wanted him dead. A crowd, more mob really, had gathered in front of the courthouse on November the 27th, 1967, the day of Jürgen's sentencing. The police were scared that people were going to lynch Jürgen before he even made it inside. But he did make it inside, and he was sentenced to life. Unfortunately, this was not the end of the story. Jürgen decides that somehow the sentence wasn't fair. So the case goes into revision, and 4 years later, a court agrees with him. The court decides that as he was a minor when he committed the crimes, he should be judged as one. In April 1971, his life term got overruled and turned into 10 years of prison, and afterwards he would go into a psychiatric hospital. He even got married, something the boys he killed would never get to experience. He married a young nursing student in 1974. Now this next bit is the real kicker. He tells his psychiatrist that once he's cleared and can leave the psychiatry, he wants to get a job working with children. The people that wanted to lynch him a few years prior had also somehow changed their mind, mostly because psychoanalysis was becoming more mainstream. People weren't angry anymore, they pitied him, mostly because his psychiatrist publicized what happened to him in his youth. And the state and his laws on punishment also changed. While before the goal was to lock criminals up as long as possible, they now wanted to re-socialize them. And even the media, which called Jürgen Satan Reborn and worse than Hitler, suddenly saw the fault in his upbringing and not with him. Now obviously Jürgen realized that the wind had changed to his fortune, but apparently the therapy had somehow worked on him because he realized he couldn't be let out unless he got his urges under control. So he asked his doctors to castrate him, and they agreed. But the anesthesiologist mixed two chemicals up wrong. And Jürgen died on the 28th of April, 1976, on that operation table. And to this day, some people think that the doctor took justice in his own hands that day. His father would to this day remain the only person that knows where his grave is. So what do you think? Was justice served? Maybe, but definitely not for everyone. His parents were never charged. The priest who committed horrendous crimes not only on Jürgen but also on other children walked free and continued working. Is our justice system or any justice system really fair if we only punish the product, but not the ones that made it? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you again in my next video.